How's it going, everybody? And welcome back. So, there was a question posted yesterday, some other stuff that I wanted to go through and talk a little bit about what's going on with I know posted a video Friday and things like that. Yesterday I went to a friend's wedding, so that was a good time. I wanted to comment on some of these uh, latest comments that were left just to try to provide some clarity. And as I've been going through the questions that have been posted lately, which awesome, I would rather um, I'd rather get the comments and questions and things like that and have feedback from you guys on those in the comments section in the form of questions that to try to help. You guys ask questions, and I do my best to try to answer those questions to try to help bridge the gap of understanding and things like that, and hopefully move the needle one notch further along to your benefit. So, as I've been going through some of these questions and some of these comments and things like that, and the if we go back to the content real quick, I normally don't show this type of stuff, but the building the lab together seems to have done really, really well. You guys seem to really like that kind of stuff, so I'm going to continue to do that and like building out the lab and walking you through my thought process, because it seems to be the thing that a lot of people they struggle with is how to build out the labs and why you would pick a particular architecture and things like that. So I'm going to continue to do that type of stuff. Focus more on if you're going to build out a lab, why are you building the lab the way you are? Why that architecture? What is the goal with the lab? Things like that to try to give you a higher level of understanding. So, and a lot of that comes from the technical depth that I have of knowing how the technology works, understanding the architecture, and it's a multi-layer approach, right? I like to use the onion analogy, where you start at an onion's got multiple layers, and the first thing you got to do is you got to take that pesky skin and the peel off of it before you can get to the actual stuff that you can work with, and so. And every layer has a little bit of film. I like to refer to it as onion paper, and you have to take that off because no one really wants to eat that stuff. That's the stuff that usually gets stuck in your teeth when you're eating onions. And I happen to love eating onion. It's one of my favorite vegetables, I guess. Anyway, to me, it adds something to whatever I'm cooking. Um, but anyway, if you liken it to an onion, and you understand the process of peeling back the onion until you get down to the very middle of it, that's very similar to the structured approach when it comes to diving into a particular technology. So there is, when it comes down to getting into the weeds of stuff, that's what you really have to do. And so with that being said, as I'm going through the Encore and an RC workbook, and I'm right now my main focus is that of what I did in my second and my third attempts at the CCNA lab. And the main function right now is to get all of the infrastructure stuff up and running first. What does that mean exactly? So I'll bring over a topology just so you guys have a reference to it. If we look at the way the topology is built, we see that there is, let me zoom out just a little bit so you guys have the full picture. If we look at the full topology and we see how this is built out, we have our ISP1, we have ISP2, then we have our MPLS provider, then we have a handful of spoke sites, then we have 2 medium sites, we have 1 big HQ site, and then we have what would eventually be a colo data center. Now, I don't know if I'm actually going to go through and actually do anything with this. This will be more of a add-on, if you will. So this won't be the main focus. So the colo won't be the main focus. It'll just be additional things like bonus material, if you will. So I'm following the blueprint for an RC, so we're definitely going to be troubleshooting a lot, and it's like, uh, BGP, best path selection, and all that type of stuff. So my main focus right now is doing what I did in the lab, focusing on getting connectivity up and running, which means doing OSPF, BGP peerings, and doing the same thing over here. OSPF and BGP peerings here, OSPF, LDP, BGP, VRFs, all that type of stuff. So that is my main focus. And when the video series comes out, which I'm going to be doing shortly after I get the entire workbook done, because I want to make sure that anything that I'm going to be demoing in the videos has already been figured out in the workbook, so that the videos go very, very seamlessly. So that is my goal with that. So with that being said, the thing that I focused on in the lab was getting connectivity up everywhere. So I focused on IGP, BGP, getting connectivity up operational, and then I would focus on reachability after that. So I would make sure to get whatever was needed to working first, and then I would go back and focus on the less important stuff, like router IDs, and if I needed to do anything with like passive interfaces or filtering and things like that, I would worry about those later. And or if filtering or BGP path selection was necessary for a particular trace route to work the way that it was supposed to be, then I would focus on those things in the infrastructure bring up stage. And then anything that was peripheral that was not required to be in place to get something working, I would focus on that secondary. And then, third was anything that was miscellaneous, that type of stuff, descriptions if they were needed, things like that. And this helped me whittle it down towards the end. When you have the bulk of it working, it's a lot easier to focus on those things after the fact. So that's one of the reasons why I'm focusing on what I'm focusing on now, is getting everything up and running, documenting everything, and all that type of stuff. So that's my plan. Now, as I've been going through this, one of the things that I was last night, I was at a friend's wedding, and the whole family went, which was great. And as I'm sitting there, because once you have, for those of you that have never attended a wedding, you have the actual ceremony where everybody walks down the aisle, they say their vows, all that good stuff, and they walk away and take their pictures. And there's usually a little bit of a time between the ceremony and then when the reception starts. It's usually a happy hour. You have some drinks and appetizers, hors d'oeuvres, all that good stuff. Well, between sitting at the oh god, I just said the word. Between the ceremony and dinner, the happy hour, and before dinner was actually called for, because they call you by table when you go to the reception, so it's usually catered. As I was sitting there, I was thinking, I had my phone out, and I'm just killing time at that point. I was on Cisco's website. I'm looking at documentation. I'm reading up on stuff that I'm not familiar with, just to try to get a better understanding. Again, 1% better every day is my logic. I was thinking to myself, well, okay, I'm working on the Encore and an RC workbook. Maybe it would be a good idea to do a workbook for CCNA. It would be a practical workbook, meaning it would be all the basic configurations based off the workbook, off the exam blueprint. There's not a lot there. It would be a rather short workbook. I'm guessing probably under 100 pages, but it would be more high-level stuff. But there would be a video series that would go along with it, where it would be like a CCNA, and I would just put that on my normal YouTube channel, because there's a lot more people that would be interested in that than, say, CCNP or CCIE. And then any of the higher-level content, NP, IE type stuff, the people that actually want to take advantage of that stuff would be able to convert over to Patreon, and then they would get access to videos and workbooks through the All Access Pass, or however that you guys want to go about doing it. It'll be fairly obvious once you get to the landing page what your options are. So That's one of the things that I'm working towards figuring out and things like that. But I'm trying to do one thing at a time. So once I get the NRC workbook done, and I'm mostly done with the videos for that. And I don't think there's going to be a ton of videos to go along with it. But at the end of the day, I'm gonna work through the blueprint and see what how far I want to take it. So, um, so with that being said, let me go ahead and move this back over here to where it was. Perfect. So I wanted to I wanted to comment on some of these comments here because I feel like it's important to note that when people have questions and things like that, the answers are provided. So part of the reason for the idea of doing a CCNA specific series, where it's literally called Cisco CCNA, a video series, and having a workbook that goes along with that, is to lay out the groundwork for higher level training. So if you guys like, I don't really have a dedicated CCNA series. So I'm thinking about doing one. I was even thinking about doing the Cisco certified, the CCST. It's something like the the technician one, like one below that, but that's all pretty much all theory. So I figured I could probably wrap those two together, but I had to review the blueprints and then put together how I would make that all work out. So when I get questions like this, where some of them are very, very low level, meaning that they're more a CCNA level question, clarification, a deep dive into how the technology works, and that's kind of how I'm looking at it. I like the Tony Stark analogy, where he's trying to figure something out, right? And as he's going through it, he then extrapolates all the little pieces to it. So what I'm thinking about doing for a video series is to do like a PowerPoint based animated examples of how this stuff comes together. So it would be looking at all the different variations of how stuff works and doing PowerPoints to make it very infographic like, because as much as I enjoy whiteboarding, I feel like whiteboarding sometimes misses the mark. So I would do some whiteboarding too, but I'm looking at it as I would go through the exam blueprint for CCNA, and we would talk about how these different technologies work. And I would build this into the PowerPoints. It'd be all for free. You guys would be able to download everything. I don't know if I would charge for the workbook though, because it would probably be so thin. If we actually look at Cisco's website real quick before I get to the actual questions. If we look at the Cisco's website, we look at certifications, and we look at browse certifications. I should really, what do you call it? If we look at the CCNA exam, CCST, the Cisco certified, we'll look at both of them real quick. Just support technician, that's what I couldn't think of. So if you look at the exam blueprint for, no thanks, IT support exam topics, and we look at the exam blueprints, this one here, it's all understanding high level stuff. It's some process, there's some ITIL, the IT infrastructure library kind of processes, hardware issues, ESD, electrostatic discharge, stuff like that. I don't know if it's a lot of hard. It's like the CompTIA A plus, but for networking. That is essentially what this is built out as. So I'm like, do I want to do this? I could bring in some aspects of it into CCNA, but if we look at the CCNA exams and training, then we look at the exam details, and we look at the exam topics. So if you dig into these, I've already pretty much done the network fundamentals, but what I'm thinking is when we get down to how stuff actually works, like you look at network access, like, okay, a VLAN. It doesn't specifically call out VLAN trunking protocol or VTP or dynamic trunking protocol, DTP. It doesn't specifically call those technologies out, but it'd be one of those things where I think having especially for someone that's entry level, having a infographic based PowerPoint presentation would be helpful. And even for those people that are, further along, but you're looking for, maybe you're fuzzy on a specific way something works or what have you, going through all of these, would it be a lot of work? Yes, it would be time consuming. But I think it would go well, or it would help the community out as a whole, that you'd have something out there, and that would make everything free to download. But as I'm looking through the labs, I probably would just make this out of packet tracer, because it would be the easiest to do. I would just be able to like build out a handful of labs. Like, okay, if we look at the configure section, we have configure and verify IP addressing and subnetting. Okay, that's easy to do. Same thing with v6. If we look at configure VLANs, configure trunking, and then configure and verify layer 2 protocols, CDP, LLDP, verify layer 2 and layer 3 port channels. Then it's describe a bunch of wireless. I can go and make labs specifically for these and how that would work. So that's what I'm kind of thinking about doing, and using packet tracer to do a lot of this stuff and just mimic the lab. And then that would be, to me, that would be the workbook. Would be a bunch of packet tracer labs that you guys would be able to download and leverage and go through and understand. Because, automation and programmability, I'd have to do some research here as to what actually could be done. But that's like where I'm thinking about going with this, because it makes the most sense, especially for entry level. Approach it from zero going in. And even though I'm a big proponent on knowing at least the A plus level type stuff, and then tacking on, I think A plus is a good starter certification for everybody, and then tacking on Network Plus. If you're like gonna for sure be a network guy or a network gal, and you want to go that direction, I think that's a really good place to start, is Network Plus, because it's very wide. It's not super deep, but it covers a lot of networking concepts that are going to translate well over to Cisco. Cisco has the biggest market share, and it's not always going to be visible. I've worked with plenty of customers that have taken out Catalyst and they've replaced it with Aruba. Aruba's a good platform. I think I have access to EOS. It might even be free to download. I don't know. It's one of those things that's down as a more of a down the road thing. I don't even have my whiteboard of things to talk about. But same thing with Juniper. I think Juniper probably would be a good idea to cover too. But there's two more platforms, or two additional vendors that I just thought of off the top of my head that I could go learn how to work with. But again, it's the lifelong learner mentality kicking in here. So I think this would be a good thing to cover in as far as I can take it, because it's going to benefit the community as a whole, and I think it would be worth the time and effort to put into it. It would be a slow process because it would be a lot of labs and PowerPoint breakdowns, and what's the word I'm looking for? Having the infographics built into the animations. Like, okay, this happens. Explain how spanning tree reconvergence works. They don't. They talk about it here, but it's like, okay, now that I had how does the listening, learning, forwarding, blocking, all that type, how does that work, and then come into play? Because if you've never actually dove into it, you may not understand it that well. So that's what I'm thinking about doing. And the reason why this thought process actually came to mind is because I have a son who's a freshman in high school who's we're almost at the end of the school year. And one of the things that I plan on doing with him this summer is sitting down with him, and we're going to start learning cloud together. So I already know the general for AWS, Azure, GCP. But one of the things we're going to do over the course of summer is we're going to sit down and we're going to go through the big three cloud providers, entry-level certifications, and I'm not even sure what those are off the top of my head. I have to go look it up. But I'm walking him through, and with me together, and I bought him a whiteboard that's about, yay big, the size of a cutting board, so that we can draw this stuff out, so that he can see what's going on. So because I don't expect a 15-year-old to be able to comprehend some of the things, and a lot of stuff I'm going to be able to pull right out of the back of my head, like, I know what they're talking about, and go through it because I have real world experience. So that's kind of where I'm like that level of base, the basic, is where I'm kind of coming from with this, and then produce content around that as well. So for like AWS and stuff like that, it may not be necessarily going through and showing you guys how to do everything in the GUI. Maybe it is. I don't know, but I'm putting myself in the shoes of a 15-year-old. I remember being 15. It was a long time ago, but I remember being 15 and my dad trying to explain something to me, and I just wasn't clicking. And it was just all verbal. Like there was nothing for me to visualize to help me try to grasp the understanding until he actually sat me down in front of a computer and showed me how to do something. I was like, oh, this is what you meant. You know, swapping the jumpers on a hard drive in order to make it a master or a slave. You know, okay, what's a jumper? To me, a jumper is somebody that jumps up and down. Like I had no correlation to that, so that's where that came into play. Anyway, that's what I'm thinking about doing. It's more going to be doing once the time allows me to do so, and dive into those details. But with that being said, those are the things that I was going to talk about and go through. So there's going to be a lot of CCST stuff that will come into play as well. I'm probably not going to dig too much into this. This is more, like I said, A+. If you're interested in diving into that, sounds like a great idea. But, you know, I'm honestly, to me, this would be a lot of research for me. I know what most of the stuff is, but probably be a waste of my time to dig into that. It's too low level. All right, so let's answer a couple of these questions and then move on. So, one thing I hope to learn from this is the BGP, VPN, VRF route targeting, and DM. I'm assuming he meant DM VPN. So when you see this type of stuff pop up, I believe I know who this person is, but I'm not going to go call them out directly. But so I believe this person already has the enterprise workbook, and that stuff has already been covered. So, and it's going to be covered again inside the NRC workbook. So I believe this person already went through this, and there was some specifics he was trying to dive into, and I tried my best to try to answer the questions, but sometimes you need a very just copy and paste this in and it'll just work, and then you have to sit there and reverse engineer it. It means you have to just see how it's all working and then understand the different variations. Good. I'm glad you're looking to take advantage of it. Yeah, I hope you are too. Something I don't quite understand working for an ISP: why do customer CEs, customer edges, have NATing on their WAN interfaces? I mean, won't the ISP already NAT their IPs to VPN-v4 label? Also, won't the ISP PE already apply NATing, or at least to another address? So why apply NATing at the CE if you're already translate the outcome at the PE? So, you're automatically assuming that the provider edge router is doing MPLS, which is a false. You shouldn't be doing that. And just because MPLS is enabled doesn't mean it's always layer 3 VPN. There's quite a few ISPs out there that do MPLS cores and backbones, but they do strictly everything in layer 2 VPN, meaning they don't route you through their core like layer 3 VPN. They route you over the core via layer 2 VPN. They set up some sort of point-to-point connection known as a pseudo wire from the ingress PE to the egress PE, whether that's a point-to-point, whether it's at the interface level, meaning there's no VLAN associated to it, so it's untagged. There's eVPL, where there's a VLAN associated to it. There's an EVP LAN, meaning that you have three or more devices in the same subnet. So no, when you're dealing with direct access to the internet, the providers aren't going to be giving you a private IP address. At least we don't. We don't give you a private IP address. We give you a public address. If you come to us and say, we want to do internet with you, great. We'll give you a public address space. which means that you need to do the NAT on your side. So that is why NAT is important. So don't assume that Layer 3 VPN is used out of the gate. Now, is there VPN-v4 labels in the core? There are. VPN-v4 is used by BGP to so the way that this typically works in Layer 3 VPN, the VPN-v4 label only comes into play when you're learning a route from the customer inside of a VRF on a provider edge router. That label is the customer's route identifier, and prepended to all that information, the IP address specifically, or the subnet, I should say, the subnet of the route learned, prepended that we're put in front of is the route target value, or I'm sorry, the route distinguisher, and the route distinguisher makes the route unique per VRF, per customer. We don't. So the providers out there that don't do any Layer 3 VPN, I'm not going to say who I work for here on YouTube, but if you know me through LinkedIn, you can figure out who I work for. If anybody puts who I work for in the comments, I will delete the comment. I keep a very clear separation between who I work for and YouTube. I maintain that line. I do not cross that line. So VPN-v4, it only comes into play when a customer route is learned inside of a VRF on a provider edge router, regardless of the routing protocol. Static, BGP, IGP, doesn't matter. So if they're doing, can you NAT? Yes, you can. Would I? Unless there's a specific reason to do so, I wouldn't. Typically, can you provide internet access through a VRF? You can. You can do a route into. You can you can bring a default route into your VRF. You can have there's ways to do that through route target imports, VRF route leaking through route maps. It's a VRF import map, so you can do that. So if you are not working for an ISP and they do Layer 3 VPN, and you're trying to understand why the CE needs to NAT, well, the simple rule here on the internet is no RFC 1918 address base and no bogons. Bogons are going to be anything else that doesn't fall inside of RFC 1918, but also is not a address space that's public. Could be all kinds of different stuff. 127, 169, 224, which is the multicast address range. Trying to think what else there's off the top of my head. There's a whole bunch of other ranges that the 192, 192.0.2 is an RFC for documentation. Just like the 2001 DB8 is a documentation subnet. So don't assume that that's automatically the case, because it's not. So if I'm working with a customer and they buy an internet circuit from me, and they get, I'm going to deliver that as a point-to-point /30 from my edge router to their edge router, which they could, whether it's something they own or something they have through a managed services from us, that is going to be a public subnet. And then the router that's terminating that subnet is going to advertise that into BGP, but that's going to be learned up towards the our edge going out to the internet. So it's going to be internet routable, but the subnet itself is public. And so the customer is going to have to NAT on their device, whether it's something we manage or something the customer manages. They'll have to NAT their RFC 1918 address space into a public block. So that is something that happens a lot, and do we do MPLS in our core? We do, but we're a Layer 2 VPN only. We don't do any Layer 3 VPN, and for obvious reasons. It's there is some complexities that come into play where we don't care about QoS. If you're doing Layer 2 VPN, you don't care about QoS, because can we be specific to bandwidth? We can do that, which does require a little bit of QoS, But for the most part, if you come to me and say, hey, I need a point-to-point connection between these two locations, great. I set up a point-to-point pseudo wire between the router closest to you and the router closest to the destination you're trying to reach. And then when that circuit's delivered, boom, it's private address space. Anything layer 2 VPN will always be a private IP address space where, because it's not routable, right? It doesn't go out to the internet. Where if you order an internet circuit from me, regardless of how it's delivered to you, then that's going to be a public address space. And that is going to require NAT, network address translation. You're going to have to translate the IP address from private to public, going out to the internet, and then vice versa. You're going to have to translate that back to private once it comes back to you. So these are things to think about when you're looking at how connectivity comes into play. So now that you brought this up, what I would do is, if you have questions like this, I would bubble those up to like, okay, why are we doing this? Like, I don't understand. I would bubble it up because I don't know for sure how your ISP does things. And, there are people that there are people there that did things specifically in order to make things work the way that they are. And if you're still trying to learn, which it seems like you clearly are, I would take that question to the people that know stuff or implemented the environment you're in, bubble that question up to them. Whether ask a colleague, ask your boss, whatever. Or be like, hey, I have a question about this. Who do I ask? I do that all the time. I'm in the organization that I work for. I'm on an architecture team that is dubbed by my management and my leadership all the way up to like top dog in the organization, know that we're supposed to be the most technical team in the sales organization. So I work in pre-sales. So when the 7 people that I work with, including my manager, we're all very, very technical. And we often have lots and lots of deep technical conversations. And I've been a CCIE for almost 10 years. It'll be 9 years in October. And there's another CCIE on my team who's been a CCIE for 25 years. And one of the things that when we're on a conversation, or we're on a call, we're all having a conversation, is I often will sit there, mind you, we're on WebEx because we're dispersed throughout the entire country. I will often sit back and I will just listen. Why? Well, because even though I have an IE, there's a lot of things about the service provider world I am not that familiar with, because most of my career I've spent working in the enterprise and data center spaces. So I know data center really well, and I know enterprise networking really well. I also know BGP and IGP. So when we get down to, am I like dumb when it comes to it? No, I'm fairly adept. However, I listen to the people that have way more experience than I do. And the reality is there are 3 people on my team that have 20 plus years in building up internet backbones. So it's like, one guy I work with was the guy that built out Windstream's backbone. One guy I work with helped design and develop how GTT's entire network architecture is put together. So when I'm presented with guys that have decades of experience in another area of networking that I have basically under a year of experience in, I shut up and I listen, because they're going to have a shit ton of experience that I just don't. So I don't care how many CCIEs you have or how many years of experience in a particular area. You might be a cloud god, right? You might be like, if there's a cloud question, everybody points to you and you can answer it. That's great. However, I tend to take a back seat in these conversations. And if you were to look at my internal OneNote for who I work for, you would see a ton of notes being taken because I listen to the guys talking. I mean, I get most of what they're saying. And if I have questions, I'm like, hey, question, clarification on that piece. And I'll ask whatever questions I have. But see, the thing is, I don't care how long I've been doing this. what I do is I have the humility to be able to say, I don't understand what's going on here. Can somebody explain that to me and break it down? And the benefit to that is I'm going to get a direct answer very, very quickly from the people that know what they're doing. And I'm going to be able to bubble that level of experience up very, very quickly. And if I still have further questions, I'll be like, hey, I don't quite, yeah, it makes sense, but this little piece doesn't make sense to me. But that's where knowing what I know and knowing what I don't know, that the very fine line that rides in between the two, I'm able to say something and ask a question. So I don't like anyone that's on this channel that watches any of the content that I produce that is ever in a position where they don't want to feel stupid or be made fun of. You know what? The only stupid question you don't ask is the only stupid question is the one you don't ask. So if you want to keep your mouth shut because you don't want to look stupid to your colleagues, well then you're going to continue to be the stupid person because you're not humble enough to ask the question. And I would rather ask the question and be educated than not ask the question and go, oh, that's what you meant. Okay, got it. So, the only way you learn is by asking questions, right? That's the bottom line. So I'm not saying that's you specifically, but or that you're afraid to ask questions, but it sounds like there's some questions that you need to be asking, and the people that work there probably can answer them better than I can. So I'm making some assumptions as to how stuff works, but I know how the technology operates. So I'm able to provide a little bit of insight there. So I would definitely say if you have questions on stuff, make sure you raise your hand. And when somebody says, anybody have questions? And there's a 1 or 2 second pause, I'd be ready. Like I have my mouse on the mute button, and where you're already muted, and like it says, anybody have any questions? You can click the mute button. I'm like, yeah, I have one real quick. We can take this offline if we need to, but the question I have is X, and state your question. And maybe it's a 30-second response from somebody that's in the know, or maybe it's just like they give you a really high level answer, but maybe that's too high level for you and you don't understand it. Like, okay, yeah, okay, all right, well, thanks for that, but is it possible we could take that offline and I ping you directly and maybe we set up an offline call and we can chat about that, or we can chat about this after the call? And I have very rarely ever heard somebody say no. I don't want to answer that question. And it's just like, yeah, sure. Just look at my calendar or send me a meeting invite, and we can have a chat about that. Or are you free for 5 minutes after the call so we can talk about it? Sure, yeah, or whatever the case might be. So I'm always the guy to ask the question. I'm the Captain Obvious person, and so I'll be like, do you mean this specifically, right? Because I want to leave no doubt my understanding of how something works. So I'm just hoping that if you hear from someone like me that's got 15 years of experience, I have a CCIE, and I'm coming up, I'm a little over a year and change away from hitting my 10 years as one. I'm working towards another CCIE and a CCDE. That if you hear someone like me not being afraid to ask questions when you're like, you should know a lot. The reality of it is, I know this much. Like, actually, I'm gonna come down here. When it comes to the service provider world, I know this much. When it comes to enterprise and data center networking, I'm way up here. I know a lot. So there's a big gap in between those two. So if I'm down here with service provider, and there's guys up here with service provider, I'm gonna ask them questions so that my level comes up to here every time I ask a question. And before you know it, after the course of, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years, they'll be up here, I'll be up here. And I'll be that much more knowledgeable about how it works. And I don't care how many certs you have. I don't care how much experience you have. The only way you're going to get better is if you ask the question. So don't be afraid to ask the question. Well, I'm afraid of looking stupid. So if somebody calls you out, well, don't ask a stupid question. The only stupid question is the one that isn't asked, is my response to that. And I'd rather know than not. You can Google, but the problem is, if there's something specifically going on in your environment, you need to talk to the dudes or the gals that made that stuff a reality. So anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox at this point. I have some more labs to go do. So you guys have a good rest of your weekend. For those of you that are here in the U.S., if you're already, if you're overseas or elsewhere and it's nighttime there, I hope you guys have an awesome rest of your week. And I will talk to all of you in the next one.